I'm starting to wonder if Joseph has ever gotten a good night's sleep. The Lord kept appearing to him in a dream. Like, Lord, why can't you tell me this at 11 o'clock in the morning or something? I saw a motto, or I forget to call it, for Kentucky educational television this week. And it said, KET, where learning comes to life. And it occurred to me this week, that'll be a nice motto for Christian families, but with one little difference. So KET, of course, or at least I assume, means that where learning comes to life, means that they make learning interesting, that while we're being entertained by whatever show it is, we're also learning, you know. I mean it more literally. Where learning comes to life. In other words, life is there and learning comes to it, right? And that's consonant with what the church says is one of the purposes of marriage. You've heard me say this before, I'm sure. But one of the purposes of marriage is the procreation and education of offspring. So first comes the procreation and then education. And so the first thing to note about the Christian family is that life begins in the family, at least according to God's plan. Now, I'm not criticizing anybody. We all can make mistakes, and sometimes we get that balled up a little bit. We might have to get married a little sooner, or might offer a child for adoption or something. But in the way of things, in God's plan of things, life begins in the family, not in a test tube, not in a surrogate somewhere, you know? And then education, then learning comes. And to understand what kind of learning, I borrowed an image from John Paul II and from Vatican II. They called the family the domestic church. I thought I'd pull that analogy a little further and make it a little more concrete, or a little, maybe a little more immediate. So I put it this way. Your family is the first parish that your children will belong to. And just as our parish has a school, you know, many Catholic parishes have a school, so your Catholic parish has a school attached to it. And between the school building and this church building, what we try to do here at the parish is pass on or is encourage the subjective elements of the faith, try to bring the children into a deeper relationship with God, and teach the objective elements of the faith. You know, how many sacraments they are, and the fact that God is a Trinity, things like that. So with that in mind, I picked some highlights that I think should belong in Catholic family. And first of all, of course, is worship. That the child learns to worship God the way God has laid it out. That every Sunday we worship God. Not just that we worship, but why we worship God, you know. That all life comes from God and is directed back towards God. And that fact that we have life, et cetera, a lot of reasons. I was thinking, I was 11 years old, I think, until I realized that not everybody went to church. And I think it was because that was the year I spent my 6th grade in a public school. And I met non-Catholics, a bunch of them, for the first time, and realized they didn't all go to, none of them went to Mass, you know, but they didn't even all go to church. And I went I just, to me, it was like the air we breathed or something. It never even occurred to me not to go to church. And my folks didn't put Cheerios in my hand or a coloring book or whatever to kind of keep me quiet during Mass, you know. I had a missal, you know. Had the Catholic, had the Latin and the English prayers on it and some pictures or whatever. By the time I got old enough to realize some people didn't go to church, I liked going to church. I liked Mass. I found it interesting, you know. And so it seems like the first thing a Catholic family ought to do is just bring their children up worshiping. And included in that, of course, would be prayers. I always think a child should learn the Our Father and the Hail Mary and the Glory Be, whatever, from their parents, you know. I'm always sad we get children in kindergarten who don't know their prayers, you know. That they learn the blessing before meals and the thanksgiving after. We seem to forget that prayer a lot. That we learn a morning prayer and a prayer before bed or something. But that the children grow up praying. Because that is by far the best way for children to come to know God and come closer to God, is through prayer. You know. And then the saints, that children would learn the saints. I always think that besides after a Bible and a catechism, every family should have a big book of the saints, you know, lives of the saints. And that children would learn who the saints are. You know, I always think you could make it a game or something even, you know, where you learn the saint of the day. What does it mean that today's the feast day of St. Anthony or St. Joseph, you know, etc. And why are they saints? That they would grow up early on with examples of the heroes of our faith, you know. And then along with that, the virtues. The virtues really are God's values. We know that there are earthly values, there are human values, and those values don't always coincide with God's values. Just read through the Beatitudes sometimes, and you'll see, you know, blessed are the poor, blessed are those who mourn. Clearly, God has a different idea of what is valuable than we do, you know. And it's up to us to learn it. And they'll learn soon enough the world's values of putting oneself forward, of making money, of self-assertion, you know, whatever, competition. They'll learn those soon enough. They should be growing up first learning, like that list that we heard in the second reading, you know. And instead of self-assertion, they learn self-gift. They learn humility. They learn to apologize when they do something wrong to someone. And then they learn to forgive when people do something wrong to them. They learn all those virtues that we heard, you know. Because if they practice the virtues and learn the virtues, and if you as parents insist on the virtues, of course that means you yourselves have to live them, then they learn God's values, you know. And this is a big one. I put this separate because it's between God's values and our values is vocation. You've probably heard this. I hear this periodically. And it's usually a woman saying, my father taught me or my mother taught me or somebody taught me that I could be anything I wanted, you know. And the other women go, yeah, empowerment of women, you know. And that's fine. I used to think it was okay, but over the years, the more I think about it, I think there's something flawed in that. Those are human values. Those are worldly values. See, the Christian doesn't say, all right, what do I want to be? I can be anything I want. The Christian says, God made me. What did he make me for? What gifts did he give me? How can I use my gifts to further salvation in the world? What does God want me to be? And it may not be a priest or religious. That doesn't mean that, but it may. I still believe that no Catholic boy should grow up without being asked numerous times, do you think God might want you to be a priest? And women should grow up being asked numerous times, do you think God might want you to be a sister? None. But God might want you to be a banker or an attorney or a social worker, a baker. It could be a lot of things, But in a Catholic family, in a Catholic parish family, the question is not, what do I want to do with my life? But what does God want me to do with this gift of life that He's given me? Because God made me. He knows me in and out, through and through. He knows what I'm good for, and He knows what will truly make me happy. So this idea of vocation should be uppermost in a Catholic family parish. And so you might say, okay, if I do all these things, will I make my family a holy family? And the truth is no. There's nothing you can do to make your family a holy family, because it's the nature of holiness. Only God is holy, right? You alone are the Holy One, we just prayed. You alone are the Lord. And God is the one that makes people or things holy. In a few minutes, in the beginning of the Eucharistic prayer, and I'm going to use the second Eucharistic prayer because it's so obvious, and I'm just warning you, the last two Masses, I can do it up there, but I can't seem to do it here. But after the Holy Holy, it begins, you, God, are indeed holy, the fount of all holiness. And then I put my hands, lay my hands, so to speak, over the bread and wine, and I say something. Of all holiness. Make holy, therefore, these gifts, we pray, or something like that. So be ready for it. So God is the only one who makes anything or anyone holy, right? What I'm suggesting is not that you become a holy family, but that you become a religious family. In the best sense of the word. I think our society doesn't like that word religious. Somehow we interpret that to mean overly pious. In the seminary we used to call some people, we shouldn't, I know, but we used to call them pods, pious and overly devotional, that everything had to be done with your hands folded and whatever, your eyes raised to heaven. No, that's not what I mean. But to be truly religious in its fullest sense. The Latin word religare, from which that word comes, means to tie together. So to be religious is to have a relationship with God, to be tied with God, to know God and be known by God, right? And if your family is a religious family, if you do these things I'm talking about, then God will be able to make your family a holy family.